We have multiple huge Leafs updates to go over today as multiple new reports have dropped as it pertains to the future of many key Leafs players that has fans fired up. But we also have one big update surrounding a Leafs coach. A ton to go over today as a lot of changes are not only imminent, but the changes have officially begun. So a ton to go over. But before we get into it all, if you're part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Leafs content. You guys have been absolute beasts. So thank you guys for continued support. We're on the road to 30,000 subscribers. And I'll be back to my home setup later today. So thank you guys for continued support there and bearing with that, of course. There's a lot to go over today, and reports keep flying. I mean, left, right, and center. There's reports about Mitch Marner, reports about everybody. And let's start with the update surrounding John Tavares, because there's a lot to go into today. We also have some movement on the coaching staff of the Leafs side, which we'll dive into later. Stay tuned for that. But Chris Johnson recently came out in the Johnson show and said there's a 70% chance that Tavares stays with Toronto, and he suggested it was 90% before Treliving's press conference, which happened yesterday. So Darius, we'll start with this. We also have an update on Knies, but Johnston lowering his percentage a little bit here for John Tavares, and I think that's mostly because obviously he has some intel, but also I think clearly Brad Treliving wants drastic and monumental changes here, and I don't think that John Tavares can be excluded from that, though I do ultimately think they get the deal done in the $4 to $5 million range. But it's a very interesting note here. It's up to or it's down, depending on where you initially viewed it, at a 30% chance.
I really think it still has to do with the dollar amount and how much term John Tavares wants. And I think the situation right now is still very fluid. What we heard yesterday in terms of wanting to change the DNA, that has to do with John Tavares too. It has to do with everybody on the team. Obviously, they're not going to rebuild. They're not going to trade everybody. They're not going to trade Austin Matthews. But they have an option here to not re-sign John Tavares if they don't want to. But if they don't do that, they have to go out and get a second line center that is of equal value or better than John Tavares. And can you do that through free agency? I don't know if you can this year, right? Can you do it via trade? Yeah, maybe, but then you have to give up some assets. So they have to take a look at it. I think the situation's very fluid. I think they have to look at the whole thing and say, is this a player that we actually think can help us across the finish line here? And if the answer is no, then they're not going to re-sign him. So they're going to figure that out over the next week or so, I think, or next couple weeks, and come to a decision. We're going to get to another player in a few minutes too that I think is the only definite in this entire thing, and that is Matthew Knies. But in terms of John Tavares, again, I think it's still very fluid. But after yesterday's presser, I think it's less likely that he signs than it was before because he said he had positive conversations. But I think, as they've had time to mull things over and Brad Treliving, like he said, I mean, he seemed pretty dejected in that press conference talking about games 5 and 7 and how, they need to change the DNA of this team. And I totally agree with that, but it could have to do with John Tavares as well. So it has to do with how much money and how long he wants to sign for. And if it is, 2 years and 4 to 5 million, I can see the Leafs doing that because it would help the team and they can do other things with the cap they would be saving. But if it's anything more than that, I think it's going to be really tough for them.
Yeah, and obviously John Tavares, we were both in this we both love the player. He's very good. Whether he continues to be the player he was last year, in his age 35, 36 season is up in the air. But as a third line center, if you can get him for cheap, 4 or 5 million a year, sure, you obviously go for it. But the way Brad Treliving's speaking, I think he's open to monumental changes and just getting rid of. I mean, Mitch Marner's still up in the air, of course, at this moment. Of course, John Tavares, depending on how things go with that. But let's also touch on a Knies extension. Now, CJ suggested an 8x8 on a long-term deal or around 4 to 5 million on a 3-year deal. Now, we've heard some reports, and this I think is optimistic thinking from the Leafs side because this would be a steal either way. I'm very happy with an 8x8. I think that's something that Leafs fans are clamoring for, similar to Juraj Slafkovsky, though I think at the point of signing right now, Knies has had a better year and a better career, I guess, but a better year at this point than Slafkovsky did before signing that extension, so there is some comparables there. But I mean, a 4 to 5 million a year on a 3-year deal, that's realistically how these bridge deals should go because you get a bit less if you're Matthew Knies, but you open yourself up to a mega extension there in 3 years' time when he's 25, 26 years old. But we're hearing 7 million over 3 years as the more recently suggested one. So this one's very encouraging from Chris Johnson here. And I mean, at the end of the day, Matthew Knies, look at his projected cap hit. I mean, he's due to earn $7 million, $6 million. So depending on how much, I guess, he factors into it, I can't imagine a 30 goal scorer in his age 22 season with how critical he's going to be with being an RFA. I don't think any teams are going to offer sheet him, but I think 4 to 5 million on a 3-year deal would be perfect, but also very optimistic there given his projections.
If you can get Matthew Knies on an 8x8 and he will agree to that, sign that contract tomorrow. Get that done tomorrow as soon as possible. That is great value for what he brings to the table. And signing him long term like that that contract is going to age beautifully. Now, I understand why you might want a bridge, and some of the numbers that, we just went into are a lot lower than what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks and what's been out there up until yesterday at this point. So that is encouraging as well. But again, a bridge deal, like you said, would open up a huge extension at the end of it. And I think that could be worrisome for the Leafs. Again, you would only have to worry about it 4, 5 years down the road, right? Something like that, maybe 3 or 4 years down the road. But it's still something you're going to have to worry about. Whereas if you lock him up for 8 million times eight, if he's continuing to progress into the player that we see that he is in front of our very eyes, that's going to be a great contract. That's going to age beautifully. I keep saying it, but like if you can get him on a long-term contract, that is the best case scenario. I wouldn't hate a bridge either. Just lock him up at this point, but you will have to worry about that after 5 years that he's going to command probably a lot of money if this continues to go the way it is, because he's a very useful player and a player that you can build around too. Yes, he needs players around him to be able to do the things that he does, skilled players, but he's the type of player that you can win with, and his play style works in the regular season and it translates to the playoffs. So he's been great. And if he takes 8x8, if he's willing to sign that tomorrow, I would take that.
Yeah, and obviously, hopefully he does take that. That's still up in the air. And then of course with John Tavares, he's projected very similar money, funny enough, although over a decade, age there and difference. But it's going to be very interesting. You see this here. We're talking about Mitch Marner and John Tavares going and finding different people so the mindset changes. It's hard to change the DNA of the people you have, and that's the big key here. We discussed it in yesterday's videos a bunch about DNA. DNA doesn't just change by adding different third and fourth liners and replacing David Camp and Pontus Holmberg with other people. It's a matter of completely changing the outlook and the framework of this team and finding players who are not, it could be like you mentioned, the Dubas era, he didn't acquire champions, where maybe Brad Treliving goes out and tries to acquire champions, whether that be Sam Bennett, whether that be guys like Brad Marchand, who have a winning pedigree at the very least. And we also know that Treliving came out and said he wants to get Matthew Knies' deal done as soon as possible, and he thought that Matthew had a tremendous year. I think for Knies, it's just a matter of not if, but when. And then, of course, for the others, it's a matter of if rather than when. So it's going to be very interesting to see there. So let us know down below what your thoughts are on these new reports. But Darius, quickly before we wrap up here, the Leafs have some changes already happening. That is Lane Lambert. Late last night, he was hired as the head coach of the Seattle Kraken. So they no longer have an associate coach. He was heavily involved on the penalty kill. We know that. The Leafs finished 17th in the NHL on their penalty kill, though their goals allowed went down by a lot. And I believe it went from like 17th to 9th, something crazy. Don't quote me on that number. But Lane Lambert is out. They're going to have to find somebody to replace him, you would assume, unless they want to go with no associate coach. But this is a little bit disappointing for Leafs fans, but ultimately I think we're all happy for Lane Lambert. Obviously a head coaching role there is, especially on a new team, is always exciting. So congratulations to him. But the Leafs have some changes that are already going to have to be made just alongside of Brendan Shanahan being let go.
Yeah, very interesting hire to me here for the Seattle Kraken. I can see why it makes sense for them, but an interesting one. I thought they were going to go a little bit off the board, but yeah, he's gone. It was a role that the Leafs never really had before that he filled last season. I think MLSE is probably very happy about this, that now they can shed some salary in that way and probably won't replace that role like they're not replacing the president. So I don't think anyone's going to take that role again. I could be wrong, right? But it was a new role that was kind of created for him. I don't see them kind of replacing him in any capacity, but I will say that their goals against did go down significantly last season. That was a step in the right direction. And I thought the penalty kill for the most part was actually pretty good last year. And he was doing a lot with that, especially in training camp and the whole year, but obviously implementing new systems through training camp. So, don't want to overlook what he brought to the team last year, but he is moving on to Seattle. And I don't foresee them, replacing that role next season.
Yeah, let us know down below what your thoughts are on that. And also on the rest of these updates, we're going to keep you up to date every single day. So make sure to hit the subscribe button. See you guys later.